Hello. There you go. Wow, I can't believe we started without any audio. Thank you for calling it out, Mark. So, again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. It is November 28th. It's a Sunday night, which means it's time for Sunday Night Magic. I'm doing the intro all over again. So, welcome to the Variable Play Network. My name is Javi. Um, Welcome to Sunday Night Magic, where we talk about everything that is Magic and Commander EDH related. So, thank you for joining the show. We got a couple of viewers on. Thank you so much for your support. For those of you who were here last week, we finally got some live Commander gameplay. It took longer than expected. We went over the 2 hour mark, but that's really what you get when you're playing live Commander. I think that maybe if we start doing recording episodes with a little bit of editing, we can definitely maybe cut that time in half. But you know what? Live Commander, live reactions, I think really also provides a different level of entertainment for people. So, if you haven't seen that, please jump over to the last episode and check that out. I mean, that took 23 episodes and we finally got actual gameplay on the show. So, today we're going to be doing something a little different. I will be monitoring through the comments. So, definitely please share your thoughts on today's topic. Mark, thank you so much for your help there in confirming that the audio issues. So thankfully that was addressed immediately. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about or going through another one of my top 10 lists. So today is something more personal to me that I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and to be honest, it's really hard to do. This is something more of maybe personal flavor or personal preference, but Magic the Gathering has, at this time, I'm going to say somewhere close to around 180 or maybe even 200 unique mechanics for their cards that come out with every subsequent expansion. Every set, they just keep tacking on more and more abilities. So some are always like variations, or some are really highly complex, but thankfully they don't really go too far outside of the game. Introducing new card types and things like that are very rare and have had some impact to the game. But today we're going to be talking about just really some commonly used mechanics, or even some attempts to try innovating that I would consider my top 10 worst MTG mechanics. I didn't order this in any specific way. So these are 10 mechanics which I really, really don't like, and I'm going to explain to you why. If you have any mechanics that you think should be on this list, again, this is my personal list. This isn't anything set in stone or any law. I actually do have several other things that I had in contention that I wanted to add to this list, like the companion rule. So companion isn't really a mechanic, so to speak, but I almost threw it in because they double backed and had to change the rule. But that might be for a different list. Maybe top 10 mistakes MTG has made, but for mechanic wise, companion is fine, I think. So let's go ahead and start off the list. Before we do the 10, I do have an honorable mention. Number 11, making it into this list, just for a quick conversation, this is actually a very, very good mechanic, but I really think that it's just fundamentally hard to manage. And this is the mechanic of Miracle. So what you see here on screen is the card Terminus. Terminus is a 6 to cast sorcery. I love how they changed the outline border of the card with like the rays coming through it, and all of the Miracle cards have this same look. This only came out in one particular set but has been reprinted several times. Okay, so this spell is 6 to cast, but it has a Miracle cost of 1 white. And it reads as follows: you may cast this card for its Miracle cost. So instead of paying 6, you're going to pay 1. That is amazing. Okay? So you can pay it for its Miracle cost when you draw it, and if it's the first card that you drew this turn. Okay, that means that there's a little bit of some conditions that you have to meet in order for that to happen. But take this into consideration. how many times do you look at the card you're going to draw? You usually draw the card and add it into your hand and then take a look at it. So this kind of has to retrain you how to draw cards, because once it's in your hand, how do you prove that that was the card that you drew? In competitive levels of Magic, they can even get really like they're sticklers for this, because when you draw your cards, you tend to also like kind of shuffle your cards around and also like arrange it the way that you're gonna sequence it in a turn. It's so easy to lose track of this, that you drew the card and then like, oh, you realize it had a miracle cost. It's really really hard for you to prove it in a casual setting, especially like in Commander. I'm sure the entire table will kind of like, okay, sure, go ahead, just do your miracle thing. That's fine. But that's almost like a missed trigger. What you have to do now is you have to teach yourself that as you draw a card, you also look at it before adding it into your hand. So that's not necessarily how everyone plays, and it just makes the mechanic a little clunky because you miss a lot of triggers. Not to say that Miracle is a bad mechanic. I actually really like Miracle. I just don't like the circumstances of how they set it up, because Magic was already being played a particular way, and now they want people to kind of change the behavior of how they draw their cards. Thankfully, if you're not really playing a Miracles deck, this doesn't affect you too much. So that's why this is only an honorable mention, or I guess in this case, dishonorable. So let's go ahead and move to the actual top 10. Again, for those of you who are watching, I'd really appreciate your feedback. Number 10, let's go with low hanging fruit. This one isn't everyone's list. This is the quintessential what the hell were they thinking ability or mechanic in Magic the Gathering. Every time you talk about or bring up the topic of bad mechanics, banding always comes up. Banding was a ability that they introduced when Magic started. So this card, Banalish Hero, goes all the way back to the conceptualization of Magic. And basically, it is a one to cast 1/1 with the ability to band. How do I explain banding without making people's heads hurt? The closest explanation that I can provide is that a creature with banding can choose to attack with another creature, and they both become a band, like a little group. And when they hit or when they get hit, you get to assign how the damage is dealt. Typically, when an opponent is blocking your attackers, they get to choose how they're going to distribute the damage. So it just gives you a little bit of control of who lives and who dies. But to be honest, all of the creatures in Magic with banding all suck. They're all terrible. So they just kind of almost act like a meat shield for maybe 1 or 2 damage. It made combat so complicated and hard to explain, and so banding was never ever produced again outside of the initial sets of Magic. I know I've seen it in Legends and even reprinted in Chronicles, but there has never been another instance of banding that I can think of. It is really, really bad. Hey, Ron, thank you for joining and thank you for the comment. Yes, it's a damage sink. That's essentially what the whole ability is. That even if you're blocking and you have a creature with banding, you can kind of control how the damage is being dealt. It just really made the distribution of damage in combat complicated, and I don't know, just made the game unfun. So number 10, again, this is not going in any particular order, but banding. Really, this is just levels of math and algebra. I'm gonna say, like, what would you call it? Maybe just a little acrobatics that just doesn't need to happen. You can make combat much easier, and they have done it already moving forward. Next one on the list, or my number 9, goes to Soul Shift. So in the Kamigawa block, so we're talking about three sets that came out. So when we say that it is a block, that it used to mean three expansions. So we're talking about Champions of Kamigawa, Betrayers of Kamigawa, and Saviors of Kamigawa. So that is three different sets that all included spirits, or otherwise known as the Kami. So here that you on screen you have the Kami of Empty Graves. There's a whole bunch of different Kamis that were introduced into the game. Oh, hey, they didn't reprint but remove banding. Yeah, no. They have ceased to print any card that has banding. It's not necessarily an ability that is no longer recognized, but if you play cards with banding, good on you and good luck explaining it. So you're setting yourself up there. But okay, just jumping back to Soul Shift. In the Kamigawa block, they introduced the concept of humans versus the spirits, or that spirits played a big role in the story. And so they needed functionally unique abilities, and they had Soul Shift. Basically, when something with Soul Shift dies, you get to take a spirit. So again, you're only limited to this being only affecting spirits. You can get a spirit card based on the Soul Shift number. So this example here says Soul Shift 3. When this creature is put into the graveyard from play, you may return a spirit card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So it picks up dead spirits. Okay. Now, it's a 4 to cast 4/1. For what you're paying, it's gonna die. And what if this is your first creature? It doesn't get anything in the graveyard. Because again, it costs more. It's 4. So it's not gonna get any other spirit. There's weird circumstances in order for you to play this, and this is actually a decent example. There are some massive casting cost spirits that came out in this set. I'm talking like 7 or 8 to cast 4/4s. That there's no justification for why they made the card so expensive, only because it picks up other spirits. It doesn't have any impact on the game. And since it's only limited to the Kamigawa block, there's no other set that really has Soul Shift for maybe like a one-off, and like maybe some of the Modern Masters or Modern Horizon sets that they just make little one-off cards. It's never really been worth it. It's tribal. It's tacked on to borderline useless creatures that have insanely high casting costs. So I put it on my list because it's just pure inefficiency. I would never run anything that had Soul Shift for any particular reason. So number 9 goes to Soul Shift. Next one is again, this is going back to the older blocks, and this is an attempt when Wizards wanted to focus on tribal builds. And what we're looking at here is Amplify. Amplify is a way to buff up your creatures. So to give you an example, here is the Glowering Rogon. It is 6 to cast. It is a 4/4 beast. So you're already paying more. You're paying 6 for a 4/4. Doesn't have trample, doesn't have any additional abilities, okay? Amplify. As this card comes into play, add a +1/+1 counter on it for each beast card you reveal in your hand. So, you can reveal a bunch of beasts and make this thing larger. Yay! But you know what you just did? You gave away information. You gave away what you're holding. Why would you? And then you have to show beast cards, which kind of traps you in a beast tribal. That you can only really be running beast cards to make this thing even any bit worth playing. And to be honest, it's not. There are a lot of Amplify cards, like Zombies had Amplify, and it even punished you for playing Amplify, which didn't make any sense. There were bird soldiers, dragons kind of still have Amplify. They do come up once in a while in some cards, and well, Dragon tribal decks are kind of a fun build that people try out. So, sure, maybe there's that one niche market of people who still can use Amplify, but you pay too much for the creature, then you give up information about what you're holding, and all you really get is just a buff. So, I don't really think that it's worth it. And now, on the other side of that situation, we move to the next ability here, which is Devour. So, again, this is related to the dragons that I mentioned earlier. You're looking at a 6 to cast 4/4 flying haste. So, for 6/4/4, this is already better than that beast in the example earlier. Plus, it flies and it has haste. It has more going on for it. Now, it has an ability called Devour too. Well, okay, Devour. You can add a number onto that, but for this particular example, sure, there is a number 2. And it reads as follows. As this creature comes into play, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. So thank God it doesn't just say sacrifice dragons. If it was tribal specific like Amplify, it would have been terrible, because dragons having to devour other dragons doesn't even mechanically make sense. But fine. So when it comes in, sacrifice any number of creatures. This creature comes into play with twice that many +1/+1 counters, hence the 2 in its value. So instead of giving up information from your hand to your opponent, you just give up resources. So why would you even want to do that? Oh no, because like maybe after you attack, you can sacrifice the creatures. Well, then you're wasting the haste that this dragon comes into play with. Why are you going to give up your creatures just to make one big one? I'll devour 5 creatures to this and give it +10/+10. My opponent then just bounces it to my hand or removes it. All of the effort that you or resources you spent to put this in could be nullified immediately. So it's definitely not worth it and deserves to be on this list. So, Devour. I don't know what they were thinking. Moving on, yeah, we are kind of running through the list pretty fast. But you know what? I know it's a little bit of a negative topic, but this is just something that I wanted to share, and I'll definitely be revisiting this list again in future episodes once more mechanics come out. So, speaking of new mechanics, there was a mechanic that was introduced in the Lorwyn block that seemed like an attempt to try something new for Magic. They always try to put in some new abilities. Hey, run. All right. Hey, maybe they're hungry at that time. You know what? Yeah. I mean, I get the idea behind Devour, but it's just it just doesn't really work for me at all. The next mechanic was introduced in the Lorwyn. This is technically the dual block. There was Lorwyn Morning Tide. So this card is actually from Morning Tide. And then there was Eventide and Shadowmoor. So it's actually 4 sets that made up 2 blocks in the same plane, which is so weird. They introduced the Planeswalker cards. This is an era of a lot of experimentation for Magic. This is when they decided to drop the um, the 3 sets to a block for the first time. This is like their first attempt at that experiment. And so they brought in an ability called Clash. Okay, so this card, Redeem the Lost, is a 2 to cast instant. It says target creature gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. That is really what the ability of this card is. Now, they added on another ability, which is Clash with an opponent. Okay, if you happen to win that clash, you get to return this card to your hand. You keep it. Okay, now what is a clash? It's actually written right in the card. Each clashing player reveals the top card of their library and then puts it on the top or bottom. A player wins if his or her card had the highest converted mana cost. This is fundamentally stupid or random for me. This is introducing the game War. I don't know if any of you have ever played War, where you take a deck of cards and you just flip the top and you just compare numbers. Why would you compare numbers? Why? Because your deck is full of high casting cost cards. That's actually that works against you. Why would you play high casting cost cards? Because you want to win clashes? It doesn't make sense. So, in the old days of Magic, when you would have to determine who would start first, players would just cut their library and it would be whoever had the lowest casting cost. Like a land would be an automatic zero, which meant that you get to start the game, that your player won. Now we already have dice and so many other things that we can use, even like our apps have random player selection. So that's not a problem anymore. But this is like Magic trying to introduce a different game on top of Magic. It's like if they put rock, paper, scissors on top of playing the game, which I just really did not enjoy. So this is really, really weird. Imagine that you try to use the spell to protect your creature, and then you do the clash and you lose. Okay, so the spell is spent, and all right, you continue your game. No, because it says here that both players can choose to put the card they revealed back on top or underneath. You gave your opponent the ability to look at their next card and choose if they want it or not. I mean, you get to look at it, you get to see what the card is, and maybe prepare for it, but you're already in your turn. You're already implementing your plan, and now you have to change things. While your opponent gets additional information, he gets to see what the top of your deck is or what your next turn is looking like. I mean, you can tuck the card underneath, sure. They get to do that too. Let's say that the next card was a land for them and they don't need it. Put it under. You just help them. So, as much as you want to be competitive in Magic, Clash can really work against you. And that's why I put it on this list. Clash was an ability that seemed interesting in a way that you and your opponent would have like this little mini fight, but the fact that it resolves by giving you options to put cards on the top or bottom just helps your opponent more. So we're now moving into my top five. These ones are, again, I kind of ranked these ones in a way that I took into consideration their impact to the game. The first one is it's guild specific. The very first time that the guilds of Ravnica were introduced, so Ravnica City of Guilds, I was really excited. This got me back into playing Standard. I went back into pre releases and I couldn't wait to see what they were going to do with all of the color combinations. And on the last set, which was called Dissension, they introduced the blue white faction, which is the Azoria Senate. So they were the rule makers, and this fit my play style perfectly. And then their abilities were spoiled, and we got Forecast. So if you're looking at the screen here, we have Pride of the Clouds. The artwork is amazing. Rebecca Guay makes amazing art. I'm not questioning that part of it. This is a 2 to cast 1/1 flyer. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature in play. So it even counts your opponent's creatures with flying. It's actually a pretty decent creature. Without the forecast stuff on the bottom, you'd still maybe want to try playing this. But let's go ahead and read Forecast. So, Forecast, 2 colorless, a white and a blue mana. Reveal Pride of Clouds from your hand. So you're giving up information. You're showing that you have this card in your hand. Put a 1/1 white and blue bird creature token with flying into play. Play this ability only during your upkeep and only once each turn. You're paying 4 to get a single flyer. Even the example of Pride of Clouds itself is a 2 to cast 1/1 flying. So it's already half the cost and even better because it gets bigger. And then you can only do this during your upkeep. You're paying a lot of resources. You have timing restrictions and you can only do it once. And then you take the rest of your turn. So you know how hard it is to fit everything into just your upkeep. What if you don't get to play an additional land because your turn hasn't started really? You're not in your main phase, so you don't get a land drop yet. Any excess mana that you would have produced in your upkeep doesn't carry over into your main phase. Then your opponents can still respond to this. So I don't get why they gave the Azoria Senate an ability that had so much restrictions to it when in fact they were the faction that was supposed to impose restrictions to their opponents. I mean, they fixed this later on. Detain is a great ability. And, pretty much the Azorius faction has really become the whole lawmakers that they were meant to be. But the very first ability that they thought of for this faction was just dumbfoundingly bad. There is maybe one or two cards that might have been considered because it makes your creatures unblockable, but they had to have power two or less. So I don't know. It's like you show the card, you get a 1/1 bird, and then you might lose resources. You can only do it once. And that card goes back, which means that it could even affect your total hand size. That you might cap at 7, and then you're going to have to give up a card. If your entire build is based on forecast, you might have, let's say, 3 copies of Pride of Clouds in your hand. What do you need the other copies for then? So it can even work against you. So I just wasn't a fan of it. And I felt really disappointed because I really wanted the Azoria Senate to be great. And thankfully, they did fix that in a way. They've introduced so much better blue and white cards after the flop that was Dissension. But, some damage has been done, especially to my opinion of this ability. Next is another guild ability, and I really don't want to be mean to the guilds. I mean, this is like they're kind of just tied to two colors, but this one just needs to be mentioned. The next one is called Cypher. Cypher is specific to the Dimir guild. So this is like the unspoken guild of, so the Dimir is like they're the syndicate. They're supposed to be like assassins and thieves and you know like they don't exist but they do. This card is called Last Thoughts. It is a 4 to cast sorcery. So that's terrible because all it does is that you draw a card. There are cheaper spells that even just cost 1 and you get to draw a card. So why does it cost 4? Because it has Cypher. What does Cypher do? You may exile this card encoded on a creature you control. Encoded isn't even in any manual or explanation of magic. So you are stepping into a realm of like what does encoded even mean? But so basically you just you take this card and put it on a creature. Fine. So it's not part of the game anymore. You can just turn it into a reminder. Okay? Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. So they didn't even use imprint. Imprint was already an existing effect that Magic had that more or less could have been used, I think, but I think because of the state of the card already going into exile or something like that, that imprint may have not been proper. But so be it. So you cast this, you draw a card, and then you get to stick it onto a creature that you own. Every time that that creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Okay, now if that creature happens to die, that effect is gone forever. If you have to save your creature by bouncing it to your hand, you've lost that ability. The cost for the spell or what you get is already not worth it. And then you have to get through combat, deal damage to a player to get the effect a second time. It just makes it so overly complicated that it doesn't really make it worth playing at all. This is the second ability that they've come up with for the Demir Syndicate. The first one, Transmute, was amazing. This one is for the second time that we visited the plane of Ravnica, and it was terrible. So Cypher, I wanted to try using it, but I couldn't really find any ability that was worth the cost to play. There's even one that just changed like the color of a spell. It just, I don't know what they were meant for, and I really highly discourage anyone from using Cypher. The new abilities that they've come up with afterwards, like Surveil, is the best thing. Transmute and Surveil are probably the best abilities for the Dimir guild. And this here being mono blue means that you can kind of splash it onto other guilds, but or even other color combinations. I mean, but it's just not worth it. So we move to my bottom three, so to speak. The very first one is again from probably one of my most despised blocks of Magic the Gathering, which is also kind of shocking because it's getting a new set soon with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So this is already the second card that I've brought up from the Kamigawa block. First one being Soul Shift. This is Sweep. Sweep is not good, and let me tell you why. You're looking at Barrel Down Sokenzan. Yeah, they really took some risk with those namings. So this is a 3 to cast instant. You're already paying 3 for it, okay? What does it do? Return any number of mountains you control to their owner's hand. Barrel Down Sokenzan deals damage to target creature equal to twice the number of mountains returned this way. Sure, I'll take 10 mountains back and deal 20 damage to your creature. You don't even get to target a player, but that's not really what Sweep is about. Sweep is about returning lands to your hand for the ability to happen. You've paid for the spell, and now you have to return lands, and then you get an effect. Okay, but guess what? You're only allowed to play one land per turn. The recovery for what you are giving up for this spell is really, really bad. If you're desperate and you even barrel down for 3 mountains and then play 1 mountain that turn because you haven't played a land, okay, you're still down by 2. That is 2 land drops. It goes to your hand, which might even put you at your maximum hand size and force you to discard those lands. It's levels of bad that no one has ever used Sweep. It only showed up in a few cards in the Betray. I believe this is the Saviors of Kamigawa, the third set, and it was really, really bad. Sweep, along with another well, Channel has some decent cards or some usable cards, but even that was just everything that came out of Kamigawa was either so niche that it was so set specific, introducing ninjas, introducing spirit abilities, Bushido, just samurai abilities that it can't really carry over into anything else. So they painted themselves into a corner and came up with some super underpowered abilities, and that is, well, one of them is Sweep. It's bad. All right. Hey, couple of comments. Okay, I'm not an expert in MTG, but redeem the lost cards ability sounds funny. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of effects that just give protection to a creature. White has so many cards that protect creatures from a color until end of turn. There are enchantments, there are so many effects. White is the most defensive color in Magic, and usually they do provide specific color protection. It just so happens that they added on that whole clash thing at the end of it. Otherwise, you can find so many other cards with the same ability. Right? And then another comment. Let's see. Maybe they built a shift deck around Clash. No, why? Why? Okay, yeah, the casting costs of Soul Shift are definitely gonna make you win clashes, but no, you don't want to do that. You really don't. Oh no, Ron, no, no. That's painful to think about. All right. So second to the last here. Again, I didn't really wanna rank these and put numbers to them because I think they're situational. Like some of the guild specific ones will never be in some color combination. So why would they rank higher than others? It just depends on like your frequency of color usage. Now, this one I put on my list, and I have not seen this show up on anyone else's lists, like on YouTube videos or Reddit lists. But this one is just more of a personal pet peeve of mine, and this is the ability Recover. Recover was introduced in Cold Snap, which is the missing Ice Age block that was lost in a file cabinet and found later, if you want to believe that story. But basically, it's an ability that was introduced for one set, and thank God. It's not the worst mechanic, but there's just a bit of it that really, really annoys me. And let me go through that with you. This is Grim Harvest. It is a 2 to cast instant. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Alright, so it's basically a recovery card. So you get a creature that died back to your hand. Great. Recover. When a creature is put into the graveyard from play, so even your opponent's side, as long as a creature goes into a graveyard, you may pay 3. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Alright, that's amazing. Which means that you can reuse the card. That's great. Now, what happens if you don't have the 3 mana available when a creature dies? It says otherwise remove this from the game. This is sitting in your graveyard. A creature dies on your opponent's side. You may not remember that it is in your graveyard, okay? So this is just me nitpicking and being a little bit, I'm going to say, a little bit of a rule lawyer. Magic has thus far already loosened up how the rules work. But think about this. On on one of your turns that you attack an opponent and something and somebody blocks and it dies, okay, that you're playing. And then all of a sudden late game, okay, you see that it's still in your graveyard. When a creature dies, you may pay 3. If you do, return this to your hand. Otherwise, remove it from the game. You forgot to remove it. An opponent can actually call a judge on you and technical foul you for failing to meet the card's requirements. That you should have exiled this. This card or this stupid ability makes you have to monitor your graveyard now. I mean, in casual game or something, you can just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have removed this." It's perfectly fine. That's why it's not that bad. It's just me really being nitpicky about this that you could forget the trigger. Now, imagine if you are using abilities like Threshold that you need to have 7 cards in your graveyard. This could alter the count. If you are using new modern cards that allow you to play things from your graveyard, let's say that you are using um, one of the most important cards now that exists in Magic, that you get to escape cards from your graveyard. So escape means that you will exile 3 cards, and pretty much you get to do an ability. What is the name of that card? But so recover it's just it's something that you have to keep watching and be very careful about, and it could technically be a foul against you. You could be counting your graveyard wrong. You're missing triggers. Um, if you are going to use this for their Underworld Breach, Underworld Breach needs you to remove 3 cards from your graveyard to recast the spell. If this was in your graveyard, an opponent could technical and just say, wait, that should have been exiled earlier. So no other cards in Magic really make you monitor your graveyard. And I really don't think that it should be your job to do that. This whole otherwise remove it from the game, this would only really work on Arena or like a digital version where there is an AI doing this monitoring for you. So it's not really a bad ability. It's great that you can actually potentially get a card back and then reuse it. But if you miss that opportunity, it's gone forever. The problem is you're the one who's supposed to be watching out for when it's gone forever, which is just really weird. So that's why it made it onto my list. And again, this is not mechanically bad, just something that I thought made the game more complicated than it needed to be. Now we go to my final one. This, there's only 5 cards that exist, and it's a blessing that there is only 5 cards that have this ability. Making another appearance on this list and probably giving away, which is my most hated set in Magic the Gathering, we bring in another card from the infamous Kamigawa block. This is the mechanic known as Epic. There are 5 cards that have Epic, and 1 exists for each color. Let me read what it does. This, for example, is Endless Swarm. It is 8 to cast. I believe the black one is 6 to cast. I believe the blue one is 7 to cast. So they're actually very high in casting cost and usually have 2 or 3 color pips. So they are really big spells. These are like one of the first attempts at Magic to make the mythic rare cards. So this one says put a 1/1 green snake token into play for each card in your hand. So let's say that you're playing with a full grip of 7 cards. Playing this will probably make you 6/1/1 snakes, which is really not worth 8 green mana. But you know what? It has Epic. What does Epic do? For the rest of the game, you cannot play spells. Why would you do that to yourself? Next, at the beginning of each of your upkeep, so every subsequent turn, copy this spell except for its Epic ability. So basically, every turn, you just get a copy of this, which will just keep producing green snakes. The black version removes cards from your opponent's deck. Okay, I mean, it produces and does something for you, but its cost is so high, and then puts you in a position where you can no longer cast spells. So okay, you can still play lands from your hand. So that's the best that you can do. Everything else you can no longer cast. It just fills up your hand and you keep producing snakes. Great. Those snakes still have to actually do their job. And they're 1/1s. They're not even flying. So they can't even defend you really. You can no longer defend yourself with spells. You can no longer counter spells. You can no longer spot remove things. You have to be reliant on abilities and lands. That's about it. It puts you in such a terrible place. The whole point of Magic is so that you can cast spells and beat your opponent down, or put them in a situation, or even just create a win condition for yourself by constantly casting spells. This has just that whole wording of that for the rest of the game you can't play spells is such a self-imposed prison, which makes it a horrifyingly bad card to play. So my number one, this I really put specifically as my number one to discuss. I mean, I encourage you to go look for the other four cards with Epic and just enjoy the madness. I don't know what Wizards was thinking. Thankfully, there's only five cards with Epic, and we will hopefully never see them again. So, those were my top 10 worst MTG mechanics. To those of you who joined today's episode, I see several comments that came out today. Thank you so much. So, Mark, thank you. Oh, Ko, yes, and Ron, thank you. So, great feedback. If you guys have suggestions for what else you'd like to see or other mechanics or topics to discuss, please let me know. To some of our frequent viewers who also don't comment, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys, your support. If you want to see more Commander gameplay, please let me know. On the Variable Play Network, we actually have an open poll for those of you who would like to join us for some Commander gameplay. If you have a, let's say, pre-con to somewhere casual or even semi-competitive that you think would be able to contend with other casual gamers, if you have spell table and also a microphone and camera setup that you can also share your game space on spell table, please send us a message and perhaps you can be in one of our future episodes. So with that, thank you again, everyone. It's been a great episode, and we're not hitting the 2 hour mark this time. With that, another great Sunday. Keep gaming out.